Hi, Julian.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'll start by just introducing you,
Hmm.
and then I'll go through the longer teaser that you had sent for like
Okay.
introducing, and then I'll let the floor to you so you can start off.
Yeah.
And then I'll maybe have questions along the way, and then we'll see. Lexi is like my online assistant.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, just to know. I just had somebody else connected that logged in, logged out.
Mm.
So I've sent out the reminder. It was not possible to change because the person was not available yesterday.
Ah,
So they changed it too late. That's why I resent out a reminder.
smart. Yeah.
But often, many have asked me if I could record it and to share it.
Okay.
Share it anyway if you're okay with that on our YouTube channel. Uh,
Yeah.
it's not a big channel, but at least it's visible online. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing. People in the end, webinars, I think there are so many that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. There are 35 people that register. But you
Yeah.
don't know if people go all the way, all the way through.
I've tried to, I have practiced my presentation, but I think it might go a bit over those 20 minutes. It's hard to speak
Yeah,
shortly
but
about it.
take the time you need for it. As long as we stay within 45 minutes, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's it. It's fine. And I'll give it 5 minutes more. We'll give it, I always give 5 minutes when it's the time, just for
Mm-hmm.
people to log in. Sometimes you have 3 to 4 people logging in, sometimes you have 20 or 40. So we'll see who comes in, who doesn't.
Mm. Maybe I should try to share my screen, just test it out while we're waiting. Uh,
Yes.
I know. Okay, there. And then share.
You're able to share? Yes.
And you're not seeing my notes on the side now, right?
No, I don't see your notes.
Okay, nice.
Nice.
Good.
So there it's logged in. Hi Elodie.
Bonjour, comment vas-tu?
Très bien, merci. Elodie, Juliane. Elodie is one of the C levels at the World Diamond Council. So
Nice to meet you.
and Juliane has just finished her thesis related to gender and the DRC. So, and we're looking into if people are logging in on time or not. I have a lot that I've asked for the recordings. So I'm recording on my note taker for those who can't join in. So sometime that's
Thank you.
how. And G Gras, I guess it's you, Julie Gras? Maybe not.
Hello, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Yes, it's me, Julie.
I was thinking J Gras could be you. Um, I think I'll give it just 3 minutes more, and then we'll just start off as I had as I was saying to Elodie, a lot of requests to record and to be able to share it on the small YouTube channel. So the objective is in the end to also give the space to Julian and to this subject, which I think is of major importance for a lot of people. Let me check into one thing more, and else I'll give it the floor to you as such. I have nobody in the waiting room there. Okay, but you know what's there? Okay, let's go ahead. I'll start just by introducing you, Julian, so that when the recording is there, everybody will have the information. So Juliane Bragstad Lamvik, you're a Norwegian professional, well, you're specialized in communication, and with 3 years of experience in EU affairs, humanitarian affairs, and research and innovation across Brussels, Berlin, and Oslo. You recently graduated from the Ghent University with an MSc in Conflict and Development Studies, and you hold a BA in Public Relations, Communications, and Media Studies from Volta University College. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here as well. And thank you for the invitation, Jennifer. It really means a lot.
It's a pleasure, especially because of your profile is really as a feminist. We do have always a discussion about what is a feminist in OIT. We're scared of the word because we're very focused on the gender balance. But I think your approach to feminism is really the approach that tries to balance it between men and women. So that's why it seemed important to also notify that sometimes the word is used positively or negatively in certain contexts. But you have a particular interest in ecological transitions and climate justice. And for that, it was very important for us to have you on board. And your master research examines the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. And last week was the EU Minerals Week, or Raw Materials Week here in Brussels. So it falls perfectly within. And I see that there were a lot of people that were present there that are busy today and said, like, if you could share. So I've shared also your thesis with them. And you focus on the impact on women's right and artisanal mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I'll be in 2 weeks because I should have been this week, but it's postponed. And your work is important and a timely contribution to both feminist, political, ecological, and the broader academic literature on critical raw materials, governance, and extractivism in a post-colonial colonial context. So welcome to you. And I'll give a small extract or teaser that you helped me formulate or that on the subject of today. So the EU's green and digital transition depends heavily on critical raw materials. And we saw it yesterday, they were all in Angola. Now, Denmark has the presidency and they didn't go, but that's another discussion why they didn't go, which is a bit of my, how do you say, shame that they didn't go down there. It applies to a feminist, in this research, it applies to a feminist political ecological lens to examine how the European Critical Materials Act, together with the EU and DRC strategic partnership, might shape women's rights and artisanal and small-scale mining communities. Your work explores how the resource governance and gender justice and extractivism intersect with current debates in Europe's strategic autonomy. And it reveals how gender-neutral policy language can render inequalities invisible and risk reproducing extractive and patriarchal structures. Your findings raise important questions about the EU commitment to gender justice and in its external action, and what truly just transition would entail. If gendered inequalities at the base of the mineral supply chain are overlooked, the Act risks reinforcing extractive and unequal power structures that challenge the EU stated ambitions for a fair and sustainable transition. And I think I would just highlight one thing. Last week was also the Kimberley certificate plenary session in Dubai, with a lot of discussions of being able, I know it's around diamonds, and I'm more into the diamonds, but I think that there's a lot of discussions around also these kind of standards and what their impact are and what is conflict, not conflict, and what's the impact of these standards it should have on the purchasing of countries that accept these standards as being valid for let's say legitimizing the purchase of minerals from a certain country. So then you have the context, and Elodie was there. So just so you know who you have here in front of you in the small meeting that we're having now. So I'll let the floor to you.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen first. You did go into, so now you just see my screen, right?
Yes, we see a screen.
Okay, nice. So yeah, you did go into a lot of details that I was thinking of mentioning, but I will just skim through those parts.
Yeah, you
That,
can go into details with them. That's
yeah,
what you're here for.
I don't know what the listeners or those who would watch this YouTube video
What
either
what
have.
type of people there? So we have people who are from DRC specifically in the ASM sector.
Hmm.
We have people from the EU institutions that have, or at least that are around lobbying these institutions that have requested if they could watch in or jump in
Mhm.
if they got free on time. And then we have various from the women in mining's associations in the different countries, and some owe it, but that is more related to, let's say, the trade
Mm.
part, and what the impact of buying materials can do, though they are not directly into the minerals
Mhm.
themselves.
Yeah, okay. Good to know.
Yeah, and then there are a few people I don't know what their, let's say, I don't know what they do. I don't have their profile as such, but I just have their interests. So they are the mystery ones.
Yeah.
I'll get to know afterwards. Okay.
Yeah, but either way, I was thinking to give a bit of context as well to my presentation, just so it's a bit more clear for why I have those findings, you know. So I will just share some key insights from the research, but I won't be able to cover every analytical detail from the thesis, of course, nor that deep, but I will highlight the central patterns that emerged across the findings. Um, so first, I will discuss a little bit about the Raw Materials Act and the strategic partnership. So it was adopted in 2024 against the backdrop of EU's dependency on China, as you mentioned in the introduction. So it's a central pillar of the Green Deal and the Green Industrial Plan, and it aims to strengthen the EU's capacity across the whole value chain from processing, extraction, and recycling, and to reduce the vulnerability by increasing domestic production and diversifying imports via strategic partnerships. And one of the key strategic partnerships is the one with the Democratic Republic of Congo. They signed this mutually beneficial partnership focusing on securing access and to promote responsible supply chains. But I just also have to note that there are no strategic project yet in the DRC as we speak, but still the patterns that the act itself, the document, is showing. I mean, how the regulation is already written shows how it will shape the implementation. So it frames the responsibilities, rights, and power before projects begin as well. So they also show important tensions between the actual rhetoric that the EU uses and the local concerns in mining affected communities. So that's also a bit of you can say a limitation of my research because it's no project yet, but it also just shows that this is an early stage and can form future research as well on this topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I said, the realities can look very different from the EU policy framing. And in the DRC, a lot of people rely on ASM, and women comprise a large part of the workforce, are crucial to this mining economies. They most of the time have high risk tasks, labor intensive tasks as well. But they also face hazardous working conditions, exclusion from decision making, income disparities, and systematic discrimination. And these inequalities also don't come out of a vacuum, you can say, because they're rooted in patriarchal norms, colonial era labor divisions, also conflict and weak governance, so to say. So it's a pity that I'm spending so short time discussing this particular slide as well, because it's so much to say to this. Also, like the reasons for the gendered inequalities and how the CRMA can actually navigate this complex field as well.
And how do you think it could navigate it?
I will go a bit more into that.
Okay, after it's good, yeah.
But when we talk about responsible and sustainable supply chains, this is at least the reality that we see on the very base of those supply chains. And then the EU also has this gender action plan. The EU presents itself as a leader on gender equality, which, I mean, they are quite a good leader on gender equality, but this is the main framework for gender equality in external action. They have a pledge to commit to gender mainstreaming in all the areas of external policy. So turning a bit back, even though the CRMA is often viewed as a domestic piece of legislation, it also has the strong external dimension because it depends on forming these strategic partnerships, as I mentioned, to access minerals. And then it effectively becomes part of the EU's external action. And once it functions as external action, it should align with frameworks as GAP3, which require gender mainstreaming. So GAP3 is an important benchmark to examine how the CRMA actually deals with gender. So that was a bit of the context. And then, despite a lot of academic literature on gender in ASM, gender in natural resource management and green extractivism, I found some gaps. That there are first, no study that has examined the CRMA nor the EU Green Deal's gendered consequences in Central Africa in a feminist political ecology lens, or also how the act might affect women in ASM in particular. And second, the concept of the coloniality of gender, which helps reveal how racial capitalism depends on feminized labor. This has not yet been applied either to the EU's raw materials agenda. So these gaps raise important questions on which forms of labor, whose knowledge, rights are recognized within the EU's just transition agenda, and which are more or less rendered invisible. And this matters because it's crucial to the academic debate to show how law and regulations kind of can operate as these vehicles of dispossession, if you know what I mean. Not despite, but through their gender rhetoric or their silence. So this leads to the central research question to how does the CRMA shape women's rights in ASM in the DRC. So yeah, I don't know if you're very familiar with the FPE, the coloniality of gender and green extractivism, but these are the concepts and theories that shape my research. So a bit fast, FPE is about, it helps me examine who has access to natural resources, whose knowledge counts, and how control or power is organized in resource governance, and how it is shaped by social, political, and economic inequalities. And then the coloniality of gender, it builds on Quijano's concept of the coloniality of power, but Lugone's concept helps explain how colonial rule created racialized and hierarchical gender systems that whose bodies or labor are valued or made invisible in forms of work, but especially if you connect it to resource governance, that's very interesting. And then we have green extractivism, which has gained more momentum the recent years as well, with green technologies repacked as sustainable, even when underlying power asymmetries and social costs remained unchanged. So more or less nothing comes back to local communities, while most of the time Western communities get a lot from the extraction. So yeah, I had a few interviews with EU officials, DRC civil society, and industry actors, and I did a critical discourse analysis of the act itself and also the MOU between the EU and DRC. So yeah, this was helpful to have insights both from institutional framings and also the lived perspectives. And then I also wanted to just say something about my positionality. That's very important in conflict and development studies to mention this, and the ethical considerations in research when you are talking with people in conflict affected areas as well. So in line with the feminist political ecology as well, I try to approach this research very reflexively. I have no lived experiences in the DRC nor in ASM, and this inevitably also shapes the research I tried to remain reflexive throughout the process when it comes to interview objects, being aware of biases and power asymmetries, language differences, my own framing. And also, to be clear, this thesis can never be as decolonial as it aimed to be, because it is still embedded in Western academia. And that sounds a bit extreme maybe, but that's the reality as a global North researcher researching something far away.
Yeah, without being on the ground. Definitely. Okay.
So that's just.
So that's the next research that you mentioned also already in the thesis, but also just before you said it's a starting point.
Yeah.
For further research.
Yeah.
And I was also saying the lens with which you look at it is true that one thing that jumps to my mind is saying, okay, what about the cultural differences between the regions? Just if we talk about DRC, there's also already a lot of cultural differences between communities, masculine or more matriarchal or patriarchal communities. So it was one of the points I wanted to highlight, but now that you mention it, it also makes it clear to everybody what perspective it takes it from. So it would be nice if one day we find somebody that can be your binôme, how do you say, your counterpart in DRC, and that could confront your research with the local reality and with the local let's say information that they can share and solutions that they eventually, and that could be let's say a grassroots and upwards towards the European Union to also understand how to adapt their acts and directives so they don't have the opposite effect than the one they might have expected. So just a food for thought for those who will see this later on. A call out, if we can say it like that.
Good points. So over to my findings and the discussion.
Yes.
So first, I will talk about the Congolese civil society actors' perspectives, how they interpreted the CRMA's impact on women's rights in ASM. So going back a little bit, so I split up the research in 3 sub-questions to answer the main research question. So this is one of the sub-questions. So first of all, many had limited awareness of the act and also the strategic partnership itself, which already reflects the distance between EU policymaking and mining communities. Those who did know about it were in general more skeptical, and shows already a lack of trust because, it's a history of harm, procedural exclusion. One person said that there's a gap between the rhetoric used at conferences and the reality, especially as demand for critical minerals rises along human rights abuses and gender-based violence as well. But some other noted also that it's not because of the idea of cooperation, because they like that idea of a partnership, but that the CRMA's language of responsible or ethical sourcing does not always match what they see on the ground. And then second, they consistently emphasize the invisibility and marginalization of women's labor and rights. Women were described as easily forgotten in the supply chains. Actors also spoke about the feminization of poverty, how women are systematically pushed into the lowest paid and most risky tasks, excluded from decision-making, subject to informal taxation. So for them, the CRMA doesn't appear to address these structural inequalities in any sufficient way. And for the perceived limitations of the CRMA, some also saw potential, as I mentioned, but most of them felt like it also risks becoming one of those symbolic legislations that remain in the drawer. Many also challenged the EU's focus on raw materials extraction instead of human well-being. One person asked, which is also the title of my research, Critical for Who, to point directly towards questions of power, who benefits really, who is left out. They called for more real value addition or redefinition of value addition, where dignity, power, and more local benefits are put higher. So these interpretations really reveals marginalized local knowledge, also unequal decision-making power, and the structural undervaluing of women's labor as well. Here's a quote that I wanted to add to the presentation, which also challenges that use more of a technocratic framing of value addition and criticality. As I said, they wanted a redefinition of value addition, where criticality isn't measured by Europe's vulnerability, but whether people at the start of the supply chain actually benefit from the green transition.
And how do you see that, let's say, this is a bit out of the study, but just your feeling from the people you interviewed, the reality of humans when they need or want something, somehow they feel it necessary, and the green transition is being felt as necessary. Now, if you add critical minerals to communication, and we now add the defense, which becomes necessary, what is the sacrifice that already humans do for themselves, how they can deny the impact that they have on their own neighbor for something that they do with somebody they meet every day, or somebody that drives through their street. And then for humans who are thousands of kilometers away, and the legislation that needs to implement it, if it is not able to see the reality on the ground of the policies that they implement, is there any option that these kind of acts actually could have a positive impact?
That's a very difficult question. One would hope so, of course, that they would be able to change something. But then it was one of the people I interviewed that said that, well, maybe they also need to prioritize some bigger questions before they start start this whole process with sourcing minerals far, far away in the DRC, for example, solving the conflict before doing anything, have a bit more of a diplomatic relation. But yeah, it's a very big question.
And where do you see the responsibility? Sorry, I'm jumping in there, but it's where do you see the responsibility of the local, regional, or national governments of the countries that sell their minerals?
Of course, it's this is also a domestic issue. It's not I mean, that's also something that some other interviews show, that it's not just it's not the EU's responsibility per se to solve the conflict or to solve the gendered issues in the DRC, but when they are signing strategic partnerships, when they are entering this field, and when their external policies says that, okay, we need to have gender mainstreaming across all external policies, then it automatically also becomes their issue.
Yeah, it becomes their responsibility at least to not to buy it.
Yes.
Or to check and audit it, that if it is compliant to their recommendations, act directives, or regulations. So it should be a budget that is also allocated from the EU to go audit these situations. And then a whole third, if I do a transition towards the precious minerals where I have a bit more knowledge, and I think about countries that get banned by European brands for extracting, for example, gemstones that are not responsibly mined, but in the end, it's the community that is then penalized another time, because then their products are not bought directly by the EU, that then loses actually also a view on what's happening. So it's very complex. Is it not buying that is the solution? Is it buying but controlling? Is it buying but financing solutions on the ground? Is it the responsibility of one another? This is really where I'm struggling to find, let's say, the right positioning and what is realistic in that sense. But sorry, I didn't want to interrupt longer. I'll let you continue.
It's okay. It's nice that it turns into more of a conversation too.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so for the second sub-question, I examined how the CRMA's discourse align with the EU's commitment to gender equality. So how language constructs, maintains, and challenges power dynamics is essential in understanding policy contexts as well. That's why I chose to do a critical discourse analysis, because I thought that was an important way to do it. So for the document itself, gender is basically absent from the act. The word women appears once in a recital that refers very vaguely to socially sustainable practices, but there are no binding provisions, no indicators, and no gender sensitive requirements in the operative articles either. And the CRMA also, as you probably understood, don't reference this gap 3. Neither does the MOU. The MOU does not mention gender equality or anything about women's rights. Instead, we can say that the act relies more on broad terms such as human rights, local communities, social sustainability, but they remain quite vague, you can say, to show whether specific realities of women in ASM in particular, because that's the case, are taken into account. And then when looking at interviews with EU officials, a similar pattern appeared, because gender was described as too specific or something that should be addressed elsewhere. And one official also argued that Including gender would mean listing every vulnerable group or religion or ethnicity and so on. And another admitted that the Act's references to human rights and indigenous peoples remain also rather vague. And coming from an EU official, that's quite a finding. And across the discourse analysis, two discursive patterns also stood out quite clearly: a kind of technical rationality that frames resource governance primarily as in terms of resilience, strategic autonomy, security, and also depoliticization of gender, where gendered inequalities are abstracted away and sidelined. And here's the recital that I'm referring to. I don't have time to read the whole thing, but this is the recital 17 in the Act, and I have marked this prevention and minimization of socially adverse impacts through the use of socially sustainable practices, including respect for human rights such as the right of women. That's the only place women are mentioned.
And I always think if we mention women, I know there's a lot of still disbalances between women and men.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I wonder what are the how do you say, challenges for men, and sometimes highlighting the difference that men are struggling with can highlight also and justify more to mention men and women instead of such as rights of women, but rights of men and women, as we would do with age, children, and elderly. Somehow, because I feel sometimes if we focus only on women, we only see one side of it, and there might be a reason, then it justifies better to see men and women than it justifies to just say we need to look at women more specifically. And in that mindset, it justifies for me to go into depth of the gender differences instead of victimizing women, which might make it less attractive.
Because human rights are also women's rights.
Yes.
And men's rights and children's rights.
Yes, that's it. But it's sometimes just the wording changes how people see it.
Yeah.
And maybe the EU officials that would see the women as being a minority group, though it's 50% of the population, more or less, and even eventually more in some countries, of course. But to say that they want to look at what the challenge is for men and for women, then we could have statistics that are somehow more attractive to some people.
Yeah. I'm going to go further with the last sub-question where I examined green extractivism and how the EU CRMA might sideline local empowerment and gender justice. And here there are also some clear patterns that emerge. First, the EU actors consistently framed extractivism as sustainable. And in interviews, officials also described the CRMA as a tool of supporting local value chains or ensuring that there are no losers in the green transition. But when I spoke with civil society actors, they saw this very differently. For them, this is more of a form of green extractivism where environmental and social costs and harms are repacked as sustainable. And several also emphasized that the EU's green transition relies on resources extracted under highly unequal conditions between men and women and children, and that these inequalities are not fully addressed in the Act. And then also the gendered impacts of extraction remains largely invisible, as mentioned before. One described the situation as closer to a modern form of vassalage than to any notion of a just transition where ASM workers and women in this case contribute to Europe's clean energy transition but receive none of the benefits. And these dynamics also came very visible in an interview I had, where the person said that they ultimately were gonna have free, prior, and informed consent part of the document, but ultimately abandoned it, which you can see here. This quote shows how power imbalances shaped the CRMA even before the proposal was published, when the Commission asked for input from civil society, industry, experts, practically everyone that wants to come with input during the internal drafting. So including free, prior, informed consent provisions were initially on the table. And the advice that the Commission relied on came not from Global South civil society or indigenous organizations, but from Canada and from Australia. Other global North states saw this as a potential risk to Europe's access to minerals. And who the EU ultimately chose to listen to is also revealing, and raises also important questions about whose voices are actually prioritized in the green transition, whose concerns shape the policy, and who is structurally positioned to be heard in these consultations. So even when civil society organizations advocate for stronger rights-based protections in the Act, these can be filtered out early in the policy process if they appear to be in conflict with both strategic and economic goals, which also is a clear example of how extractive interests and geopolitical priorities as well can override local autonomy. And here is an example from my research as well, from an interview with a civil society actor, which basically also shows how the gender dimension of extractivism is one of the clearest indicators of how the transition externalizes its social and environmental costs onto women's bodies, you can say. Because women's labor and health are central to value creation of Europe's clean energy transition, as I said, which is also an example of the coloniality of gender, how patriarchal and colonial structures shape whose lives are exposed to harm, whose vulnerability remains invisible. I know that all of this sounds a bit abstract, perhaps, but
No, not at all. When you were saying that, it made me think we have Fred Uke, which is a gold miner on the group of, it's for the place of gender in the value chains of precious minerals. He's a gold miner, a young gold miner who's fighting for the reduction of the use of mercury in his communities, and to be able to sell the gold, to get the licenses of exports and sales. But also, culturally, women are not allowed to mine and go underground in Kenya. Um, and so what happens is that they are the ones who use the mercury. So there it is not, let's say, a colonial leftover or impact. It is a cultural impact of believing that it brings bad luck that women go into the ground.
yeah. I
So
heard something like that as well.
it says, my point is, it has to be made clearer whether it is the responsibility of, let's say, the colonial history or neo-colonialistic practices, or if it is cultural practices due to more ancient and cultural beliefs, local beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
which could be for the next study, the one who's on the ground to check
Yeah.
where it comes from. Okay.
Um, yeah, I'm gonna try to summarize the findings and the discussion part, and then we will go to the conclusion as well. Um, yeah, so for sub-question one, we saw that civil society actors largely experience the act as disconnected from lived realities. The technocratic framing it has does not reflect the daily conditions of women in ASM either, or men as well, but this is a case of women in ASM. They describe the invisibility, symbolic inclusion, and raises concerns about the start of the supply chains and how they are once again going to be forgotten. And also a reminder that this is not only stakeholders, but also rights holders. And then for sub-question two, it showed a disconnect between the legal text in the CRMA and the Gender Action Plan 3. It doesn't integrate Gender Action Plan 3. It does not operationalize gender. It relies more on broad terms. And through discourse analysis, I saw two patterns: the technical rationality and the depoliticization of gender, which makes gender inequalities invisible and treated as an issue outside of the scope of resource governance. And then sub-question three reveals more how this plays out in practice. Extractivism is framed as sustainable, while local empowerment and gender justice remain sidelined. Yeah, the abandonment of stronger free prior informed consent, for example, shows how securing access to minerals took precedence over rights-based protections, which also causes an abandonment of trust, which doesn't look so well for this mutual beneficial partnership. And the findings also show that there's a form of epistemic violence that maintains patriarchal and racialized hierarchies in resource governance. And while the EU also isn't blind to the potential harms of critical raw materials extraction, it still fails to meaningfully include local communities and women miners or civil society in shaping what sustainability or value addition actually means in practice. So yeah, in that sense, the CRMA's failure to shape women's rights in ASM itself is a finding, and a very important one. So to conclude, my research shows that it doesn't substantially shape women's rights in ASM in the DRC. Yeah, an unjust transition as well remains unevenly distributed. Women in ASM are excluded from decision making, from protection, from equitably benefits, even though their labor is essential to the transition the EU seeks to achieve as well. Yeah.
And do you think somehow it could be lacking in this directive because it's included in others? Like, I don't know
Yeah.
if it's CSRD or or other, and then they don't think it has to be covered twice.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the new regulations oblige to lean on some more specific standards like IRMA or other mining standards,
Mm-hmm.
where this might or might not. Some of them are more environmentally focused and some are a bit more social focused. But could that be a reason why the EU, I don't know if that some mentioned that, has not put enough focus here and to try to keep the text shorter? Because if they had to include everything, as one of your interviewees mentioned, if we have to include everybody and everything, it becomes too much.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It is newer regulation as well. For example, the forced labor regulation is something as well where they mention women and children and men as well more thoroughly. But yeah, it doesn't, how do you say it? It still would have made sense if they would mention it here because of what it entails.
If we think of directives being more government to government talks, but then if the EU implements these standards when companies import, because in the end it's a company that imports, they're somehow also keeping the friendly mindset between governments and the access to raw materials. But on the other hand, tightening a bit up the request that the companies, and they put the responsibility a bit down on companies to do their due diligence on the value chain of purchase of materials that they do. That somehow makes it less conflictual at macroeconomical or macropolitical level. But they do fine a company theoretically that does not apply an import standard. Because when we talk with big companies are made aware of regulations and they try to apply it. Now, is it really efficient or not? Is all this sustainability, everything that is being done, even traceability, ESG standards, auditing, certifications, is it just a way to tick a box? I think it does drag a trend. Is not as efficient as it would like to be, but it drags a trend to something a bit better than it was maybe 50 years ago at
Yes,
that level.
for
Now,
sure.
it's just the demand is so increased that it would be much worse if we had not done that and that the demand had increased. It would have been like at industrial level times 10. But somehow I feel that the macro political level of directives of this kind and acts of this kind try to keep this diplomatic frame while pushing it down to the private sector to try to comply. But then the private sector has an issue of having a value chain where the information actually percolated on what is the right thing to do. And then for them, it becomes also difficult to purchase, but it's their responsibility. And they are the ones who become the washing machines also, which is not fair either. So this is a bit where I see the points that could be cleared by the EU.
Yeah, I actually I did attend. Now it's a bit not about my research, but I attended the Raw Materials Week last week.
Yes.
And I attended a seminar on the strategic projects that are currently that have gotten that has been designated as strategic, and there are 13 strategic projects currently outside of the EU, and this seminar was led by, I think it's called Business and Human Rights Resource Center, and I'm gonna send you the briefing they published on these strategic projects, because that's also gonna be a bit interesting to see now with the second round of strategic projects as well. I think the deadline is in mid-January. Whether there will be any strategic projects in the DRC, because for now it's not. But what this report is saying is that that it's not really so much transparency on how these strategic projects were chosen either. And then a lot of these projects don't have proper policies or regulations when it comes to due diligence and human rights abuses and so in their own supply chains. So yeah, I'm gonna send you this
Yeah, please do.
report because it's quite interesting
Yes.
and also related to my findings as well. So that was quite cool to go to.
Yeah, I think it was brilliant week as such. Um, Maybe do you have a closing remark that you would like to add on, like a call out, a remark, a point that is for you a next step in all this?
Yeah, so like that's how I rounded up my whole thesis too, that a truly just transition would require centering those whose lives and labor make the transition possible.
Yes.
So if that would be possible, that would go a long way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Make
that's
it
my
human-centric instead of product-centric.
yes.
Yeah.
And I also had this if anyone wants to connect with me, and I wanted to thank everyone for listening, although we're not so many today, but on YouTube perhaps.
Yeah.
And also for taking the time to be here, and for you too, Jennifer, for organizing on this whole thing. So yeah,
That's a pleasure. It's a bit what we have. I always say webinars, there are so many that sometimes I think it should just be, we should do it as interviews and then publish them. But it's always nice also to open up the floor if somebody can connect and have questions or comments. Thank you, Elodie, for hanging on. Julie,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. And I'll be publishing it on the group and first, and then converting it to the YouTube as Alexi is another let's say format of IT format of video. So thank both of you being there.
Thank you.
And Juliane, we meet up.
Just here is the report I was talking about.
Yes, please put the link.
Chat
I'll add it directly here.
for we end, if it's interesting.
Yes, it is. It's always good to learn. Good. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Have
you
a
so
nice
much.
afternoon. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.